I am Colby Sumner, and this is America, Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of...
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
I can hear you! I can hear you! The rest of the world hears you! And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of it.
We're told that on his body was found a diary. Under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another Hippocket History. I am Colby Sumner, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Brett Thomas. How you doing today, buddy?
Good. What's up? What's up?
Oh, you know, we're getting ready to, well, honestly, this is pretty unique. We've talked about a lot of different things on this show so far, but this is the first time we're talking about something that we're kind of personally invested in. Today we're going to be talking about the Battle of Fallujah. This primarily the Second Battle of Fallujah, but we're going to talk about both the first and the second battles. And the reason why we're connected to this, neither of us were in Fallujah in 2004. Well, I was still in high school. But the reason why we're connected is all the guys that we learned from when we got into the Marine Corps were Fallujah vets, man. Fallujah and Ramadi, and that 2004, 2005 window of time where the fighting got super intense.
Yeah,
super intense.
We're very lucky for that, because to have our drill instructors, most of them had been through some part of that experience, and then from drill instructors to
School of
to
Infantry?
the fleet, School of Infantry to the fleet to platoon sergeants, section leaders, they all have some sort of experience that's relatable.
We were talking about this the other day, eating lunch, but one of my when you go to School of Infantry, you're assigned to just a platoon, 11's platoon kind of deal. You don't necessarily get broken up into your MOS. That comes later when they do the MOS breakdown. But for the first month you're there, all the instructors are teaching the same thing. I ended up in a platoon with 0311 instructors, and I remember my head instructor. I cannot remember his first name. His name was Sergeant Wilcox, and the guy was so freaking knowledgeable, dude. Like, you can tell he had been there and done it for real. He had a scar on his face, just salty, salt dog for sure. And when we graduated SOI, they had a formation. Like, in that formation, they had a ceremony right before they actually graduated us. And this could have been in the rehearsal for the graduation. It kind of blurs together because it's been so long ago. But I remember them reading a warrant for him to receive the Bronze Star for actions that he had done in Fallujah.
Yeah.
A few years before that.
Yeah, definitely.
And man, it's just crazy to think about. Then our senior guys, when we got to when we actually got to our platoon and our unit and to the fleet, our platoon sergeants and those guys were all, Nazariya, Ramadi, all in this window of time.
Yep.
Their experience helped shape and prepare us so much for what we were going to encounter in Marja.
Absolutely.
A few years later, and I'm excited to talk about this story. I think it's one that a lot of people know of. I think a lot of people know Fallujah. When you think Iraq, most people think Fallujah, Ramadi. These are names that are synonymous with the war, but I don't think they fully understand just how intense this fight was, and a lot of the crazy stuff surrounding the reasons for going into Fallujah, and stuff happening on the peripheries of the city and in the rest of Al Anbar in general. But to give everybody kind of an idea, like to start this story off, At the end of 2003, going into 2004, OIF 1, Operation Iraqi Freedom 1. There's like 7 OIFs. When you and I went to Ramadi, we actually got 2 stars on our campaign ribbon because we were there for 3 separate OIFs.
Yep. January 1st of that following year, it was a new one.
Right. It kept shifting on us.
Yep.
So that being said, during OIF 1, U.S. and coalition forces are fighting Saddam's military, essentially. They're fighting the Ba'athist Party, right? So this whole, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and this insurgency mindset wasn't a thing in that first year of the war. When you get into 2004, it starts becoming prevalent, right? You start having these Islamic terrorist organizations, anti-coalition organizations that start sprouting up all over the place. They start introducing things like IEDs, suicide IEDs, vehicle-borne suicide IEDs, right? So SV bids and all this stuff.
They get creative with it.
Things start to heat up in 2004, and the focal point of all of that is the Al Anbar province. But even more specifically, if you were to narrow that down into where things really started kicking off, it would be Fallujah. Now, just to give you an idea, the way Fallujah is as a city, even the locals in Iraq, people that live in Baghdad, for instance, would tell you, don't go to Fallujah. It's a crazy city. Like, they're backwoods. They don't trust anybody that's not from there. Case in point, when Baghdad is celebrating Saddam's capture and then his subsequent execution, and they're tearing down his statues and slapping it with their flip-flops and all that stuff, Fallujah is almost in a riot. The civilians in Fallujah are pissed about it. Because, again, this is where a lot of the former Ba'athist military guys live. Most of the city is out of work now because Saddam's military has been, basically decimated. There is no more military to go to anymore. And their outlook on U.S. and coalition forces being there is not positive like the other parts of the country. I say all that to get us to where this story begins. So, on March 31st, 2004, there is going to be a team of 4 security contractors that work for Blackwater Security Consulting Group. Now, these 4 guys are super experienced, former military guys. One's a former Navy SEAL. One's a former Army Ranger. Another guy was in the 82nd Airborne. One of them actually got the Bronze Star in Afghanistan earlier in the war, right? So these 4 guys are very experienced combat fighters. They know what they're doing. They had escorted a supply run somewhere in Al Anbar province earlier that day, and I believe they were trying to make their way back to Baghdad. They wanted to take a shortcut through Ramadi to cut some time off through Fallujah to cut some time off their trip. At this point in time, Fallujah is the most dangerous city in Iraq, possibly the world, right? This start of the insurgency war, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and all the other numerous, Islamic terror organizations that spring up from this war, they're all starting to make an appearance there in Fallujah. Well, they decided to do this shortcut through the city without notifying the U.S. military presence that's in control of that AO, right? So the Marines in that sector, they belong to Regimental Combat Team 1, they have no clue that these guys are getting ready to roll through the city. If they did, they might have been able to send some kind of support to them. Well, I'm sure many of you remember seeing the images of what happens next, but I want to read a quote from this book by Bing West called No True Glory, because it really is eye-opening, and it shows you the kind of stuff that we were fighting over there, and the kind of hate that those ideals and those organizations spread throughout the populace that made the fighting so nasty. But in his book, No True Glory, Bing West describes what happens next like this. Quote, "The contractors crept along in the dense traffic, passing on their right the main police station and the walled compound of the city council, formerly the headquarters for the Ba'ath Party. The government city in Midtown was the final landmark where the contractors could have turned back had any Iraqi policemen waved them down. No Iraqi, though, raised a hand to warn them. Minutes later, emerging from the doorways of shops, insurgents dashed into the street and sprayed both vehicles. Some claimed an Iraqi police pickup had been leading the SUVs and had sped away at the last minute, which that sounds very feasible.
Very well could happen.
It could have also been not the case either. Continuing on with the quote, with no armor plating on the vehicles, the 4 men inside were riddled with bullets. They had had no chance to fire back. The firing ceased, the shooters drove off, and a crowd of men and boys approached. When an American with bullet wounds in his chest staggered out and fell to the ground, he was kicked, stomped, stabbed, and butchered. A boy ran up with a can of gasoline, doused the SUVs, and struck a match. The black smoke pointed like a finger up into the sky, attracting a swelling crowd. Egged on by older men, boys dragged the smoldering corpses onto the pavement and beat the charred flesh with their flip-flops to show that Americans were scum under the soles of their shoes. A body was ripped apart, and a leg attached to a rope was tossed over a power line above the highway. This continued all day, the crowd spurring on one another, shouting, "Viva Mujahideen, long live the resistance." 2 of the charred corpses were dragged behind a car through the souk, which is a part of the town.
Okay.
Past rows of small shops and hundreds of cheering men, to the green trestle bridge that the Americans called the Brooklyn Bridge. There the mob hung the bodies from an overhead girder, 2 black lumps dangling at the end of ropes. Crowds in the souk and along the highway were swept up in the murderous atmosphere. No police tried to restore order. No fire truck put out the flames smoldering around the SUVs. No ambulance came for the bodies. When 2 Iraqi nurses tried to take the bodies to a hospital, they were told to leave or be shot. End quote.
That's quite an image there, man.
It is. And listen, the footage of this was aired on international television.
I remember seeing it with my own eyes. I'm sure as you do too. Same as the towers going down September 11th. All of this stuff was on TV for all of us to see.
Yeah, and so obviously the political and the public reaction to these images was overwhelmingly unanimous. There's some kind of retaliatory action had to be done against, the insurgents that made this happen. They couldn't just be allowed to go free. Someone had to pay.
Yeah, someone's got to pay, and these guys are obviously terrorists. Things are getting a little bit worse, and American lives have been lost. So naturally, the Bush administration, like you said, has to respond to this in some capacity. So just days later, April 2nd, 2004, Joint Task Force 7, they're going to issue orders to the 1st MEF, the Marine Expeditionary Force, and they're going to come up with offensive operations against Fallujah, and they're going to call it Operation Vigilant Resolve. So this is the first Battle of Fallujah, really. Now, the 1st MEF commander, Lieutenant General James Conway, and the 1st MEF ground force commander, Major General James Mattis.
Mad Dog.
Mad Dog. They have other plans. They want, naturally, you would push through a city like this just as they had in the invasion. These guys want more of a surgical attempt to extract certain individuals or certain groups of individuals or safe houses or weapon caches, pick these things out of this city and clean it up that way, like cleaning up a parasite in a way.
Right. You're exactly right. Mattis, along with U.S. Army General David Petraeus, they both were when the war switched from fighting Saddam's former military to an insurgency. Both of them knew they had to kind of change up their tactics.
Yeah.
They looked back to wars like Vietnam and some of the other wars that take place in Southeast Asia throughout that time and realized that, a conventional full-force assault on a city is not the best way to combat an insurgency, right? You've got to put the local face on it. You got to be a little more strategic. People are living there.
And there's a lot of locals.
There's like 500,000 people that live in Fallujah, right? It's a huge freaking city.
Yeah.
And so Mattis and Conway, before they even go on this deployment, they know ahead of time how they want to approach this with the counterinsurgency operations. You remember when we were in, they were still talking coin when we got in. You remember that?
Yeah.
Coin this, coin that, hearts and minds.
Yeah, hearts and minds. That was
going
huge.
going on patrols with IPs, and then when we were in Afghanistan, going on patrols with ANA. So the IPs are Iraqi policemen.
Yep.
ANA is an Afghan National Army soldier, and there was a strategy behind that. Even though a lot of the time, especially in Iraq, the IPs you weren't that confident in. Now Afghanistan's a different story. Those ANA guys, some of them, they like to get down, right? They'll fight with you to the end. I didn't get that vibe from the IPs.
Nah.
But that being said,
They were on their own program.
you're trying to win over that local populace because it's the local populace that is fostering these insurgents to begin with, right? Without the support of the local populace, those insurgents will have no leg to stand on.
And it's still very early in the war.
It is.
It's like only
We've
like a
been
year
there a
in.
year, right? I've been there a year, and so Mattis and Conway both were like, nah, man, we shouldn't do that. We have intel. We know we've identified the people that are responsible for this attack. I want to say there was like 9 of them.
Yeah.
And like you said, go in and remove them like a parasite, right? Strategically, surgically, go in and grab these guys up and make them pay that way. But they were not under the impression that an assault on the city was a good idea.
Right. Not yet. So, in any case, just like you quoted before, Bing West, he said here, I quote this, "Once the 2 Marines were given their orders, they saluted, turned about smartly, and let slip the dogs of war."
That's that. Let slip the dogs of war. And who better to say that about than James Mattis?
Yeah.
The mad dog himself.
Even though he doesn't really want to do it that way, he's gonna.
Well, he's a Marine. He's
what
a
he's gotta do.
professional, right? He's got his orders. He gave his opinion. He's received his orders. Now he's got a job to do.
Yep. So 2 days later, on April 4th. So now we're still kind of in the same week as this event took place, and Regimental Combat Team 1 is going to establish a cordon around the city, and they're going to begin a slow, methodical advance into the city, where a cordon is to surround the place and not let anybody in or out. And obviously they're experienced fierce fighting because Fallujah's been a hotbed since the beginning. They have fierce fighting. They experience small arms fire, RPGs, mortars. Every structure in the city is like crazy. It's urban combat, so every window, roof, door, passageway, opening, slits, holes in walls, anything can be used as a way to get after American troops.
One thing people should realize, too, there's no drywall in Iraq. Everything is concrete or cinder block, right? Like, so these are sound structures.
Yeah.
Now, they ain't nothing compared to a mud hut in Afghanistan, though. You can drop a 500-pound bomb on one of these houses in Iraq, and it'll do some damage. You drop a 500-pound bomb on a mud hut, it won't do a thing.
Right.
I don't know.
Seems to hold up. I don't know why.
It's crazy how that is this case, but it is true. That being said, when you're assaulting a city like that, first off, urban combat is some of the scariest combat that you can be exposed to because your threat is everywhere. They used to tell us in training, you got to think about a 360-degree bubble. Every direction, above, below, behind, beside, everything is a threat. And you have to have eyes on all of that at all times. Like I think about having to patrol through a city in all the different directions your squad's rifles were pointing simultaneously. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got a guy with his rifle forward. The guy behind him has got his rifle up, covering rooftops to the right on the other side of the alley, possibly. The guy behind him is covering the ground windows, right? The guy behind him, the end of the fire team, is covering to the rear.
Yep.
And that's just one little fire team, right? And you still are open to threats. If
yeah.
you start throwing IEDs in the mix and suicide, like S-vests and SV bids and then mortar fire and all that other stuff, man, it's a nightmare. And another thing about combat in urban environments is sound will betray you. Just because you hear a round come from that direction doesn't mean that's the direction it came from, right?
That's
it
right.
might pass a building and sound like it came from that way, but really you might be getting shot at from over here, right? There's so many aspects to fighting in an urban environment that you don't really experience fighting out in the countryside. And these guys are just getting after it.
Yeah, and part of keeping your head on a swivel like that is your muzzle goes where your eyes go, or vice versa. I don't
Right.
remember
You
how
never,
they said it.
You never.
You never look
do
around.
This crap here.
Right.
Where you-
If you're looking that way, your muzzle's that way, because if
Right.
you see something, you need to be able to react to that as quickly as possible. So, and talking about engaging things, it was the mosque that was like a protected space in a way, or supposed to be a protected space. But what the Marines there and soldiers and sailors had experienced was the receiving enemy fire and contact from these mosques. So as the fighting continues through Fallujah, obviously we got to fight the enemy where the enemy is, and that's in a mosque. Well, what do? They turn around, they take that as Americans are killing innocent civilians, we're blowing up mosques, we're doing this, that, and another. They put it out as propaganda, and that propaganda is going to change the way that the people, well, not change, but further alter possibly the way that people think in
Especially the
Fallujah.
locals in Iraq, right?
The locals in Iraq, Fallujah, surrounding cities like Ramadi, and mostly everything in Al Anbar province. They really have a grip on everything. And so,
And there's one company, there's one news outlet that's really kind of acting as the propaganda arm for these insurgent fighters, and that would be Al Jazeera.
yeah,
This is where Al Jazeera starts to make a name for itself in the news category of things.
Al Jazeera is putting all this information out that's not all true, saying we're killing civilians. Now that the government, the Iraqi government, is now putting pressure on the American government, saying you have to stop this. Like, please stop. And so within by April 9th of 2004, just 6 days into this vigilant resolve, the First MEF, they receive orders to suspend all operations in Fallujah. That doesn't mean suspend like leave. That means no more pushing through. So
right,
it's
no
like,
more offensive operations into the city.
no more offensive operations. And, for guys like you and I, like lower enlisted guys, the grunts on the ground, we don't get that information. It's like, this house is now your fob. You live here, set up a post.
Someone start filling sandbags.
Sandbags,
We're
post.
going to do patrols every day.
Every day, all day.
Then you have to worry about fighting these attacks that they'll do against these hard points, right? These coalition hard points. You have like from what I have gathered about the First Battle of Fallujah is on both sides. It was kind of like a sniper's dream. You've got Marine, scout sniper teams that are each guy on the team is racking up 30 kills, right? That's a lot of freaking confirmed sniper kills, right? But you also have a lot of guys on the coalition side that are getting wounded and killed by enemy snipers.
Yep.
Because again, they can be hiding anywhere, right? You go outside your house. If you live in a city, now if you live out in the woods, this ain't gonna work. But if you go outside your house or your office in a metropolitan area, count how many windows are right outside that door.
Yeah, just look around.
They're endless.
Yeah.
They're endless.
Yeah, endless possibilities.
They can be in any one of them, right? They could be in one and shoot one guy and move through a rat hole through that building into another building and shoot from another one, which they would do often.
Yes.
Right? Tunnel systems, everything you can think of, man. It's like a freaking like that honeycomb network of tunnels that you like. Have you ever seen when they fill an anthill with that like a foam or something and then pull it out of the ground? And you can see all the different tunnel systems they've got going on.
Yeah.
That's what's happening in this city, right? That there's tunnels everywhere. There's back alleys. It's a difficult thing.
And it's difficult because by the time you take contact from something like that, and then you have to maneuver to that location, which maneuvering is not always that quickly because of all your gear and where you're at and what you're going through. You may have to go through many, many things to get there. So you may find nothing if you ever do make it there. You won't find the brass or the blood or the body
Right.
most cases because by then it's already gone. So, the guys there in Fallujah taking heavy casualties, like you said, and the First MEF commander, Lieutenant General Conway, he decides we're going to make a shift here. He's going to give overall responsibility to the Fallujah Brigade. So the Fallujah Brigade, they're Iraqi guys, and the ultimate goal is to have Iraqis take the city. So not so much as a foreign invader like the United States.
The in air quote foreign invader, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately, this Fallujah Brigade, they're like not as well off and not maybe not capable, but they just fail to achieve the objective. And this is like for them, they fail at something, they have to make a decision. You stick with it, or do I just join the insurgency? And a lot of these guys, they just went on. They take their gear, they take their weapons, they take their buddies.
That they've
and they
all been provided by the U.S.
all
government.
provided by the U.S. and the training, and they just, hey, let's go. We're
hopping the
switching
fence.
sides. Yeah, we're out of here. And so
Let's address that for a minute, because you would think, all right, we were talking about this the other day. We were kind of spitballing this episode. And you would think, like, if, let's just say in some alternate universe, New York was invaded and or insurgency had taken over the city of New York, right? And Great Britain came over to help us regain control of the city.
right.
And then they decided, hey, we're going to make the New York Brigade, right? And it's going to be y'all's job to get this city under control and keep it under control. I have enough confidence in the citizens of New York that they would be able to do that and not swap sides to the insurgency, right? Like, they would be motivated enough to take back their home, right?
Yep. They want the Bronx back. They want Manhattan back. They take it. They'll take it.
That's not the case in Iraq. Afghanistan, many times that is the case. We were talking about this, the difference between Iraqi policemen and Afghan National Army guys. Now, I don't want to blanket everybody in Iraq with this statement, because that's not fair. I'm sure there are some hard-charging Iraqis, right, that were motivated to help coalition forces and their country,
Right.
Regain control of itself and keep it from these radicalized insurgents. But from my personal experience over there, I would never be confident if I got into a gunfight with an IP, right? Like, IP is supposed to watch my back.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pretend he's not even there. Actually, I'm going to keep an eye on him in case he decides to change sides in the middle of the gunfight. Whereas in Afghanistan, an Afghan National Army guy like Rambo, we had an Afghan National Army guy that we called Rambo because he would wear belt-fed 7.62 cross-bodied around him, like linked ammo around his body.
He wore the bandana. He was like a cowboy, man.
Dude,
he was all about it.
But that guy was going to fight with you to the death,
Yeah.
right? Like, he had your back. He wasn't going to let you down even when things got tough, right? There's so much behind the back political dealings in Iraq, even when we got there, which is many years after this, that they'll say one thing to you and be doing the exact opposite the minute they leave that meeting, right? Whereas, again, not to blanket everything, but in Afghanistan, I found the opposite to be true more times than not. If an Afghani were to tell you something, they usually meant that, right? Like, that's what was going to happen.
I can agree.
So in hindsight, looking at Conway giving control of the city to the Fallujah Brigade, you and I are thinking, mistake right off the bat. But they don't know that yet. This is part of the reason why you and I would know that ahead of time, right?
Right.
Is stuff like this
That's
happening.
pretty early. It took a lot of time to.
But you think about
train 'em up.
Vietnam and making these South Vietnamese units that would go fight the North Vietnamese, right? And to gain control of an area or take back control of this village or cluster of villages, they would be trusted to do that. For whatever reason, in Al Anbar, that's not the case. Now, later in the story, we're going to see that there are, brigades and regiments of Iraqi troops that are going to do a very good job the second go-round.
Right.
But ain't none of them going to be from Al Anbar province.
Yeah, probably not. They're going to be from somewhere else. Just like the terrorists are fighting, they're going to be from somewhere else.
Right.
Maybe a little bit from Anbar, but anyway. So the first Battle of Fallujah kind of ends that way, and it becomes like over the next few months. So the summer of 2004, Al Anbar and mostly Fallujah is going to become the epicenter, the hotbed of terrorist activity. And a few people are going to emerge, and one of them is the leader. His name is Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and he's going to make Fallujah his stronghold, his base of operations, and he's like going to fortify this place. So from Fallujah, he's going to launch numerous attacks. He's going to do bombings of any target. He's going to target schools, government buildings, marketplaces, bazaars, U.S. troops, everything and anything possible. Now, at the time, also kidnappings and assassinations. There's this guy, he's a contractor, and he works on radio towers. His name's Nick Berg. he was captured by al-Zarqawi, and they believe that in the video where you see him
He's like behind him
on his
reading-
knees,
Yeah.
there's like 5 guys. They believe that al-Zarqawi is the guy that actually decapitated Nick Berg on TV, and then of course it was filmed and put out through Al Jazeera on national television.
That video, man. So this is why this story is so personal to us, even though we weren't in the Battle of Fallujah. I'm so connected to everybody that like I have so many connections to it, right? From all these guys and all my instructors I had along the way. I was at Parris Island in 2007, and you know how there's a lot of classes get taught there at Parris Island, right? You have that schoolhouse where you go in and have your classes, and everybody's fighting to stay awake.
Oh yeah.
Well, if that's full with another company or battalion or whatever the case is, if it's occupied, sometimes they'll take you to that little chapel over by the PX and where you get your hair cut and all that tucked back behind it. There's that little chapel.
Yep.
Sometimes they'll do classes in that chapel. Well, very early on at Parris Island, they march us into this chapel. They sit us down, and this black shirt instructor gets up and is, I'm thinking, going to give us a class. And he says something along the lines of, listen, I want to show you guys something. It's terrible what you're getting ready to watch, but I want you to be very aware of what you're getting ready to go fight and the place they are willing to take it to. And like the evil that you're getting ready to experience is very real. And they played us that Nick Berg video. Dude, it's unbelievably hard to watch. And it is such a level of evil. So, I mean, that's just unimaginable levels of evil. I mean, it's like antiquity, barbaric, Old Testament kind of crap, man.
Right.
But I remember, though, it did fire me up. I was very excited to go get in a gunfight with some people like that.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of, in a way, kind of get revenge, right?
We need that. It's reasonable. It makes sense. It's necessary. You have to know what's going on.
But Zarqawi is a different level of evil when it comes to these insurgent leaders.
Different level of evil. And through that evilness and chaos and violence, he replaces the mayor and everybody in Fallujah with his own High Council of Fallujah, and it makes it his own. He's in charge now by the
he's
middle
pulling
of
the
summer.
strings.
And by September of that year of 2004, he's beheaded like 3 more people, British contractors, and sends those films also to Al Jazeera, and makes it well known to the world that he claims responsibility, and they're going to continue to do what they're doing. They're not going to stop. So
It's crazy.
That's kind of the first Fallujah in a nutshell, and what has become of it over the time period leading up to the Second Battle of Fallujah.
It is something to think about that it only took 6 days of butt kicking before they were like, please stop.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
6 days.
You let the Marines go for 6 days, and they're like, please, let's just hold up a little bit, guys.
Yeah. Oh, that is funny.
Now, by the time all of this has taken place, it becomes very clear to coalition and Iraqi governmental leaders, right, civilian leaders, that the insurgency in Fallujah has to be dealt with in force. Like, there has to be some kind of force used against this insurgency. You're not just going to go in and win hearts and minds anymore. The city has completely fallen to their control. So in September of 2004, 1st MEF, now under the command of Lieutenant General John Sattler, begins preliminary operations aimed at kind of preparing the battlefield for the Second Battle of Fallujah. They call these Phase 1 operations. It's going to be gathering logistics and supplies and kind of staging them around the city so that, supply chain issues don't become a problem. They don't get slowed up due to a lack of ammo or water or food or medical, supplies, whatever the case is. They're stockpiling this all around Fallujah. They have to assemble all of the combat and support elements that they're going to need for this massive assault. I mean, extremely large scale assault. So they have a lot of moving around to do. Marine infantry are going to conduct a series of feints and raids to kind of confuse the insurgents in the city. In the First Battle of Fallujah, the assault force entered the city from the east and the south, and were kind of pushing west, right?
Okay.
It's because, honestly, it's probably the easiest way to get into the city. You have Highway 10 that runs through the city, and then Highway, I forget the number exactly, but
It's
that's
11.
Highway 11.
Yeah.
So you got Route Michigan that runs through the city. That's
Yep.
what we would call it. Route Michigan
Route
through
Michigan.
the city, Route Mobile on the eastern border of the city. And there's a Cloverleaf interchange where
Yep.
they intersect about midway, as far as distance goes, midway through the city of Fallujah. You can ride that straight into the city. That Route Michigan, you can take straight into the city, right?
Yeah, right across.
You don't have any kind of crazy obstacles to deal with over there. Well, for this go around, they want the insurgents to still think that they're going to be coming from that direction, because in the northern part of Fallujah, the northwestern specifically, the Jolan district, which is the lower income district of Fallujah, that's where they discover most of the command and control nodes for the insurgency, right? And they want the idea is to take those out as quickly as possible, right? So
Yeah.
you disrupt command and control for the insurgent fighters. That's just one step closer to getting a victory on the battlefield. They're also going to be conducting bombing operations targeting insurgent defenses, again, also targeting command and control elements. There's a lot going into these Phase 1 operations. Now, at the end of these Phase 1 operations, the coalition commanders are convinced that the majority of Fallujah's civilian population has left the city. They think there's going to be about 500 civilians left in the city. Now, a city of, I hate to be incorrect here, but I'm pretty sure it's like a city of 500,000 people, which is a lot of freaking people. If there's only 500 civilians left, you've done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Now, this entire time these Phase 1 operations are going on, the U.S. is dropping leaflets in the town telling people, hey, we're getting ready to attack this city. If you are a civilian, leave. Leave now. We'll escort you out of town. You're going to be good, right? But leave now. That being said, they estimate that there's anywhere from 3,000 to 4,500 insurgent fighters still in the city, with another 1,000 insurgents, possibly more, in the entire Fallujah-Ramadi corridor. So reinforcements. So worst case scenario, they're looking at like 6,000 insurgent fighters, which is a lot of fighters, right?
Certainly.
Especially when a large portion of them are willing to die to the death.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Or die to the death. Fight to the death.
I got you on that one.
Now, intelligence also concludes that there's 33 of the 72 mosques in the city of Fallujah. Fallujah is known as the city of mosques. So 33 of those 72 mosques have been used by the insurgency, whether that's as ammo supplies, whether that's to hold meetings, command and control meetings, right, where they come up with their game plan, to set up ambush positions, to hold and torture, kidnap victims. I mean, anything under the sun you can think of. 33 of those 72 have been, all before the battle even begins, have been identified as insurgent hotbeds.
Yep.
Intelligence will also identify more than 300 well-constructed defensive positions that the insurgents have placed throughout the city, many of which are going to be interlaced with IEDs. Many of those are going to be daisy-chained IEDs. And for those of you that don't know what a daisy-chained IED is, well, first, let me just, before I explain a daisy chain, let me explain the difference in IEDs between Iraq and Afghanistan, because I think it's important for people to understand what we're really talking about here. Granted, there's exceptions to the rules on both sides of this, but generally speaking, and we know this from firsthand experience, in Afghanistan, most of the IEDs are anti-personnel IEDs, not really designed at killing, more at maiming, right? So they're aimed at knees, they're aimed at the groin. They're designed to injure whoever steps on them badly enough so that other Marines and or other soldiers and medics and corpsmen have to go treat that soldier, and then they would launch an ambush, right, while you're trying to handle all of that. The IEDs in Iraq are night and day different. The IEDs in Iraq are like 3 or 4 155 artillery shells all wired together in the back of a car and driven up to a ECP or a VCP, like a snap VCP that soldiers have put up, or Marines have put up in the city. A VCP is a vehicle checkpoint. And 4 155 artillery shells are so incredibly devastating. For instance, we had a huge IED attack happen about a quarter mile down the road from us when we were in Iraq. There was two went off. There was a first. I'll never forget this either because I was on radio. We were on QRF. Both of us were on QRF, and I was on radio watch, and I was kind of pissed because one of the guy I had already stood my hour of radio watch. The guy that was supposed to stand after me was playing horseshoes with the sergeants, and he had talked his way into getting continuing playing and skipping his watch. So Sergeant R came over and was like, "Hey man, you're gonna stand his watch, but I'll make it up to you later." I was like, "This is garbage. I'm pissed."
But you will.
But I
funny.
did it
It's
regardless.
funny.
Yeah, I did it regardless because that he said I was gonna do it. So there's really no arguing that. And I had just sat down from that talk, and all of a sudden I hear this boom. I mean, it is a loud boom, and I look up and I see the smoke, and I don't even think to I'm brand new. Like, we're brand new. We've never been in combat before, right? So you learn, you've trained for years at this point, but it's different when you get into it for the first time. I just know that I have to go tell you guys, right? Like it's time to go. I don't know how we're gonna go. I don't know what we're gonna do when we get out there, but it is time to go right now. And I start running back towards the hooches, and as soon as I turn the corner, I hear another boom that is astronomically louder. Right, and I can feel the shock. We're a quarter mile away from that ECP, and I can feel a shock wave.
Yeah.
Right, and I look back, and there's this big black mushroom cloud-looking thing coming up from the ECP. Well, what had happened to the first IED that went off was a suicide vest, and in this checkpoint, this insurgent, suicide bomber walked up to where these two Marines were manning a bats and hide system. Bats and hide system is they scan the retina, take your fingerprints. And if you had been put into the system before as a possible insurgent, they'd wrap you up. If you went through the system and your retina scan and your fingerprint didn't hit on anything, then you were good to pass into the city of Ramadi. He walked up to this thing, walked through a metal detector. The metal detector started dinging, and as soon as he got within the distance from me to you, a few feet away, clacked that S-vest off.
Yep.
The second bomb that went off was the guy that was driving the car he rode there in, and in the back of that car was 4 155 artillery shells. I say this entire story just to get to this point, to prove the point of how devastating these things are. When we arrived at that ECP, there's like 2 vehicle lanes and then a third lane where foot traffic would walk through. So the idea was the cars would come up, the driver would stay in the car, any of the passengers would get out and go through and do the bats and hides system on foot, right? They'd walk through that metal detector, they'd get scanned, and then they could meet their car on the other side of this checkpoint, hop in, and continue on into Ramadi. Iraqi policemen were in charge of checking the vehicles as they came through the vehicle lanes. These vehicle lanes are separated by T-wall barriers, and a T-wall barrier is a humongous, basically it's a humongous Jersey barrier. It looks like an upside down T, big concrete structure. It's probably 2 feet thick, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah.
The top
More
part of
than-
it's 2 feet thick. The bottom part
It's
might be
super
4 or
thick,
5
yeah.
feet thick, but the top, the main part of the wall is probably 2 feet thick, and it has rebar on the inside of it, right? So it's a very well reinforced concrete structure. When we pulled up to that explosion, I was up in a turret. You were up in a turret as well.
Yes.
And I'll never forget, dude. We pulled up, and we're looking at it the whole way. Smoke is billowing up, and as we get up, the car door, the driver's car door, had blown through the T-wall barrier. Smoke was billowing through this hole in the T-wall barrier. There's blood all over the inside of the door where it's laying on the other side. That is how it blew a car door through a rebar reinforced concrete barrier that is 2 feet thick. The blast is unbelievable, and not to mention the devastation it caused to everybody within the vicinity. I mean, that was a crazy day. That was one of the crazier things I've ever seen, actually.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. But the IEDs in Iraq, when we talk about IEDs in this episode, we're not talking about like a little anti-personnel mine. We're talking about bombs that will level an entire platoon, right? They're unbelievably big. Daisy-chained IEDs take it a step further. Daisy-chained IEDs would be that IED with 4 155 artillery shells connected to 3 or 4 more the same size, all connected with det cord. so that when one goes off, they all go off, and they'd be spread over a bigger distance. So ideally, if they allow a platoon or a squad to walk past the first few and get to the last one, when they blow it up, the whole squad will be hit by various IEDs. The secondary and tertiary IED system they had was that's what we got trained on. I remember thinking, dude, how did you take this? Because I remember getting to the fleet and starting to really learn about how to patrol and look for IEDs and our SOPs on how to handle IEDs. And I was very nervous. I was very nervous on having to go over there and finagle my way through an IED experience, because the way these guys were describing it, most of them are going to be daisy chained. They're going to have secondary, tertiary IEDs set up. They're going to be freaking huge, and they're going to be hidden very well.
Yeah.
And you have to be able, beyond looking for enemy combatants and snipers and RPGs and machine gun positions, you're also looking for little tiny wires that might give away something, or a piece of trash that's out of place.
Yeah, there's like our senior Marines, it would be certain little things just in not only in a training event or on an IED lane or something. It would just be like guys that have gone before us, and they would just in conversation say, well, when you go through there, you can't wear yellow sunglasses. You got to have clear eyes or dark sunglasses, because the glasses that are, say, yellow, you don't see a certain color wire, and that's what they would see. Or you'd hear another story from someone that said, because obviously the enemy has been watching how we respond to these IEDs and what maneuvers we take to take care of that situation. Now, here's one example. Going off of these daisy-chained IEDs, they have imagine an IED that's not hidden. It's out in the street ahead of you. So you may not notice the hidden one, because your eyes go right to that one. So you stop. Hey, there's an IED up ahead. It's just a 155 laying out in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
What you don't focus on is the secondary or tertiary right next to you or under you
where
or
it's
around
like
you.
3 or 4 155s all wired together.
Right. So by the time you stop, they know what you're going to do. And these are the things that were mentioned in training or casual conversations, and it would all stick with you in your head, and you would think, well, man, by the time I get there, these are all the things I'm going to be looking for. So you're looking around like crazy. You're always looking. Everybody's looking. The drivers, the gunners.
It gets a little overwhelming, because you're thinking, okay, I got to look for this. I got to look for that. I got to be my head's got to be on a swivel. I got to be doing this, that, and the other. I mean, dude, a lot of people in the military will make fun of infantry guys. Like that's where the dumb guys end up. To be honest with you, and this is not just to fluff up our own egos here or anything, infantry is one of the hardest jobs in the military, especially in today's military.
Yeah.
Because you have to be an expert. First off, you have to be an expert in so many different things. And secondly, your mind is processing all of that stuff continuously. Because the enemy wants to kill you, right? Like that is they're trying as hard as they can to kill you. It's not like, oh, we're just going to go stick this bomb out there and hope it works.
Yeah.
No, they've put a lot of planning and thought into this. They've watched how you operate, because again, they can blend in with the civilian populace.
Yep.
They can watch you. They can have guys out there filming you, documenting you do this, that, and the other. And we're going to see later on how much planning these guys actually do. But that being said, it is obvious that there is a very difficult fight ahead of the soldiers and Marines that are going to be involved in this Second Battle of Fallujah. My time in the military and in combat taught me the importance of being prepared. A lot can happen on the battlefield that can lead to tragedy, and I never wanted to face the consequences of failure due to a lack of my preparedness, especially when my brothers were counting on me. That's because my squad was my family. Now that I've finished my military service, what I need to do to prepare has changed, but my responsibility to ensure I am properly prepared for any eventuality remains the same. That's why I called Health Markets. One of their licensed agents took the time to examine every aspect of my family's protection and created a personalized solution of coverages that would safeguard my family and keep us prepared to face whatever the future could throw our way. so that if I find myself in the hospital, out of work from an illness or injury, or reach that inevitable last breath, I can know that my family won't ever suffer the added tragedy of financial desperation. So go to www.healthmarkets.com to connect with an agent and make the preparations you need to face any eventuality today.
So, as said before, with the insurgents expecting an attack from the eastern side or the southern side of the city, there's going to be obviously a change of plans this time, and it's going to come from General Natanski, and saying that a southward advance from the north would be the best approach. And by that, coming from the north, they'll split the city in half. They'll push down rapidly and aggressively, make their way through the entire city, kind of blitz things, because as you stated before, there's so many obstacles and setups and fallback positions. They're just going to bust right through this thing with infantry and armor. And then once from the southern end of it, once you make these areas, hit these areas you need to hit, then you come back up and methodically, like, comb through
house
by house, street by street, door by door, just kicking everything in. So
let me clarify real quick. So you mean like they're gonna lightning one end to the other, wham, just get in there as quick as they can. Once they get to the far end, the south end of the town, they'll turn around and clear everything behind them.
Yeah,
like thoroughly.
Yeah, like if you take contact from this location, hit that house, hit that one, keep going, staying on your, in your area of operation. But once you bust through, then come back and really clean it up. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts in this scenario. So in addition to coming from the north southward, there's a peninsula on the other side of the Euphrates River, just to the west, where those two bridges are, the Green Bridge and the main bridge there.
I think they call them the old and the new. I think the Green Bridge is the old one. The bridge south of that is the new bridge.
Yeah, the one.
Air quotes.
Yep, that's right. So they will also have a force that's going to come by through there and take that peninsula, secure that, which is going to secure the bridges. So again, nobody coming out. And once there's an established foothold there, you also have more room for American and coalition forces to enter the city and through those bridges. Now, one of the problems that Marines encountered during the April battle for Fallujah was the slow-moving nature.
Right.
It's like this slow, methodical. There's tons of civilians. This problem. It's not going to be the case this time.
Well, describe for everybody what the houses are like in these Iraqi cities in Al Anbar province. We were never in Fallujah. We were in Ramadi. But having seen Ramadi and how tight, like,
there's no sense to it. It doesn't make any sense. Like
there's just one on top of another on top. It's like, and it's just boom, 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 continuous. So to clear all that, like to really clear all that, what do they got to do?
Well, destroy it.
Destroy it, or put a Marine in every single room that they come across.
Yeah,
which takes time.
Takes time.
That's the first Battle of Fallujah, right? That they were trying to do that from the get-go.
Yeah, this time is going to be quite different because this guy, Major General Richard Natanski, he's the commander of the 1st Marine Division. He wants a fast penetrating attack, and he's going to rapidly secure Fallujah with the least amount of collateral damage as possible. That's always the goal, I feel like, and eliminate the propaganda that the enemy's going to be able to put out against American forces.
Because that propaganda is what really bit him in the butt the first time.
Yeah. So what they have with them this time, they got two Army armored battalions and an armored brigade, and they're going to reinforce the 1st Marine Division. And they're going to be broken up. So the assault from the north, they're going to be broken up into two regimental combat teams. And that's going to be RCT 1, Regimental Combat Team 1, commanded by Colonel Michael Shupp. And that's going to consist of 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, and U.S. Army Task Force 27, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav. Now, Regimental Combat Team 7 is going to be commanded by Colonel Craig Tucker, and they're going to consist of 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, and U.S. Army Task Force 22, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Infantry.
The Ramrods.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're going to be ramrodding through this place. And so they're going to serve all these some are going to be in blocking positions, some are going to be swinging positions, some are going to be blitzing positions. Like everything, they're all going to complement each other in a very great way.
I think of it more like a you're exactly right, but to kind of make sense in my mind, I think of it like a hammer and anvil strategy, which has been used numerous times throughout military history by many different armies. But if you're looking at a map of Fallujah, the northwestern corner is the one they figure they're going to take the most resistance from, right? Like that's where they're going to encounter the heaviest resistance, partly because of the command and control nodes mostly being located there. The other part being of how the buildings are set up there. Again, that's the more impoverished area of the town, and you think about most impoverished neighborhoods around the world. The streets are usually smaller. There's a lot more buildings usually. I mean, not necessarily skyscrapers, but houses just stacked on top of each other. Yeah. And a lot of alleyways and twists and turns, and things aren't laid out like they are in, an industrial park, for instance.
Right.
So the idea is for 3-5, who is an RCT-1, come into the Jolan district, and they'd be the anvil, right? Whereas the rest of the assaulting force is pushing south and then going to sweep west and be the hammer that drives the insurgents against the anvil of 3-5 and the Euphrates River, right? If they got that peninsula on the other side of the Euphrates River secured, they ain't nowhere for them to go, right? They're going to hit that river and be stuck.
Yeah, it's a well thought out plan, and it's going to be executed. Now, in addition to this plan being executed, you're gonna have the Brits. They're gonna be there. Not too many of them, but they're gonna be on the outside cordon in the southern area. And then, very importantly, also, like as attempted before, you're gonna have Iraqi forces. But this time, it's not a Fallujah brigade. It's Iraqi forces from outside of Al Anbar province. Iraqis from the rest of the country that want to be involved in taking their country back, taking this city back in particular, because evidently. Anybody from Al Anbar province is not going to fight against anybody from Al Anbar province.
Well, they had a problem with that in the first Battle of Fallujah.
Yeah,
where they had an entire regiment of Iraqi fighters mutiny right before they entered the battle, throw down their arms and be like, "We're leaving. We're not fighting against Anbaris."
Yeah, ain't that something? But anyway, they got guys now, but all in all, the attack force. It's going to include 9 U.S. Army and Marine Corps battalions, 6 Iraqi battalions, and that's going to be roughly 12,000 Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and Iraqi force personnel involved in this invasion force. So for the battle, the first MEF, they're going to grow from 32,000 to 45,000 personnel. So they're pretty beefed up. Quite. Every addition is being brought into this.
It's a lot of people, man.
Yeah.
It's a lot of death.
Yeah. I like all of Camp Lejeune is or at the time was 45,000 Marines, I think, maybe.
That's nuts, dude.
Yeah.
That's nuts to think. Listen, another thing I love about this is that for weeks and weeks and weeks, they can be like, hey, we're going to attack the city. The insurgents know full well that they're coming, right?
Yeah.
It don't matter. We're still going to take control of that city. You can know we're coming, but we're going to win. Like, it'll be ours in a matter of days.
In all of history, really.
Just
the Americans are coming.
Yeah, well, you might as well just do what you want to get ready, but just know it'll be ours before the end of the fight. That is crazy to think about.
It is crazy to think about, but many have gone toe to toe, and many have lost.
Now, this operation again will be called Operation Phantom Fury, and Phantom Fury's planners to kind of help set objectives and keep this assault force at the same pace. They're going to place these imaginary phase lines, this grid of imaginary phase lines over the map of Fallujah. Phase lines running north to south are going to have male names. So like phase line Henry would be one that comes to mind.
Okay.
Phase lines running east to west are going to have female names. Phase line Fran is another one that really comes to mind early on. You guys will hear us refer to these phase lines, and if you're watching on YouTube, we will have maps up throughout this episode to kind of help you keep track of where we're at and which phase lines we're talking about.
Yeah.
But just know if you're listening to the podcast and not watching on YouTube, when we mention a phase line, if it's got a female name, it's east to west. If it's got a male name, it's north to south, and you'll stay on track for the most part. Now, to help break this attack up into something that makes a little more sense, RCT-1, which again was 3-5 and 3-1 and Task Force 2-7, they're attacking the western side of Fallujah. RCT-7 is going to attack the eastern side of Fallujah. Now they're again working in tandem, but just to break the two regimental combat teams AOs down, RCT-1's on the west side, RCT-7's on the east. Now, Marine air planners, this is one thing, dude. You got to tip your hat to these guys. Most of the time, low-level grunts like you and I were don't give a lot of praise to the guys sitting in the in the regimental COC coming up with the plans for this stuff, right? Never. And they got that office job,
Yeah.
But I got to tip my hat to these guys because planning this would have just been unbelievably difficult. Now, considering the size of Fallujah, Fallujah is a smaller city than Ramadi. It's a big city, but it ain't that big. In that airspace, you're going to have mortars, artillery, unmanned aerial observation aircraft, rotary wing aircraft, whether that's attack helicopters like Apaches or Kazovac helicopters like Blackhawks. You're also going to have fixed wing assets. So your F-16s, your A-10 Warthogs. On top of all that, you're also going to have Spectre gunship flying over the city constantly too. The Spectre gunship, if anybody's played Call of Duty, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The hand of God, right? Like that's what they refer to it as, and they're not that far off. I mean, that thing it can rain devastation. But you have all of these assets taking up the air over this city of Fallujah. You don't want to run the risk of an artillery round, impacting a fixed wing jet or a Black Hawk trying to do a Kazovac. You don't want to don't want to run the risk of two aircraft having a midair collision. So to do that, the Marine air planners come up with this concept called a keyhole, and essentially it has them separating the airspace vertically, right? So helicopters are going to be kept on the periphery of the city. The attack helicopters would be. They wouldn't be allowed into the city. They'd be positioned in these, combat locations, fighting positions, essentially outside of the city, to where they could assist when needed. But they would stay at 1,500 feet or lower, right? That's their AO. Floating around at like 9,000 feet or higher are going to be all the fixed wing aircraft. Now, they wouldn't be actually in the airspace. They would be above 9,000 feet, but they wouldn't be in the airspace. They're going to be flying around the city in like a 15-mile pattern. They'll be on standby if needed, but if one is called into the AO, there can only be one fixed wing aircraft at a time because all the artillery, all the mortars, all that stuff has to cease for them to come into this airspace. Now, they'd be the only one there, so they'd have free reign to use that airspace however they needed to be able to drop their ordnance on a target, but they have to do it fast because there's other people waiting to call in those assets, right? Watching an interview with Staff Sergeant Bellavia, who we're going to talk about later, he made it sound like waiting at the DMV. Like he called in a bomb on a house, and he's like, okay, well, it better be important. You're going to get your bomb, but you're 15th in line. There's 14 other guys ahead of you that have called in for a bomb run.
Imagine
you got to wait for that, Now, another thing that's going to come up because of this, Kazovacs. You and I in Afghanistan solely relied on air Kazovac. I mean, I don't know of any. Now, that could be inaccurate. There might have been some guys that we were with that had to do a ground Kazovac.
We had one.
Did you?
In January.
I never had a ground Kazovac. All of our Kazovac be casualty evacuations. All of our Kazovacs were air Kazovac. And most of the time it was the Air Force guys, the PJs, which are like flying surgeons, dude. Those dudes are awesome.
Yeah.
But that being said, because of all the stuff flying around in the air, and because Somalia happened not that long before this, with the Black Hawk Down scenario, and if there's ever going to be a time where that's repeated, it would be in this battle.
Don't need that here.
So to avoid that, soldiers and Marines in Fallujah are going to be relying solely on ground Kazovac, which means it's going to take longer to get those wounded troops out of the AO into a hospital.
This planning is incredible. I like that keyhole concept. Like if you're in the keyhole, you got to go in and execute your strike, your thing, and dive down, drop your ordnance, come back out, and once you're cleared, and the next one goes. But for the planning, like you said, is very impressive at that time. But for the grunts on the ground, for the Marines and soldiers and sailors on the ground, do you remember terrain models?
Oh yeah, buddy.
We make in the dirt just a dirt mound, or here's the streets, here's this, and here's a stick or a rock, and this is your patrol.
This is that building, and yep.
This is objective. Here's this mosque. Here's this phase line, and it's all drawn out in the dirt, and we all just huddle around it, and maybe do a few of them. Do them with the whole platoon, and then the squads break it down into their terrain models, and you're really like not always looking at a map.
No.
Sometimes you're creating it on the ground, and then marching over to that objective and taking it out and doing whatever you got to do. But it's a terrain model.
It is, man. But they've been doing terrain models.
Yeah.
Forever.
Oh yeah.
The guys going into Normandy are like at least the paratroopers that are going into Normandy. They're all looking at a terrain model before they jump in. Right now, theirs was probably a little more extravagant than what you get in the field, like a hasty terrain model. But that being said, every part of this is planned down to a very specific detail, right? From the top level down to the guy toting saw, right? Like everybody knows exactly what's required of them. Now, in late October, General Sattler, this is the first MEF commander, he is obviously worried about going into the city and having a repeat of First Fallujah happen, where they get in, they start doing what Marines and soldiers are known for doing, right? Kicking butt.
Yep.
And then having the rug pulled out from underneath them. He meets with the Iraqi prime minister, and more or less, he tells him, hey, listen, do not tell us to kick this thing off and then think that you can ask me to stop. Once we start, there is no stopping. This is like a roller coaster. That safety harness comes down. The only way you're getting off after that is to finish the ride, right? You're going to wait till we get all the way to the southern end of that city before we stop. He also has to get that kind of confirmation from President Bush as well. But both the Iraqi prime minister and President Bush give him reassurances that, listen, this time that will not happen. Once you start, we're following this through to the end.
Good.
So on November 5th, we start getting our opening moves. The 2nd Brigade Combat Team is going to move its battalions into positions on the northeastern border and the southern border of Fallujah, while 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion will take up that southeastern portion of the border. So now the only thing left open is the Euphrates River in that Fallujah Peninsula, right, on the western side of the city. From that point on, the city is going to be effectively sealed off. No one in, no one out. The only people that are allowed to leave the city from this point on are women and children. If you're a military-aged male, so if you're between the ages of like 14 and 50, you're not leaving. You can come try, but we're going to send you back. You better find a good hiding place if you're not an enemy combatant. And as we come through the city, we'll get you out then, but nobody is leaving. On November 7th at around 7 p.m., we're going to be using military time in this, so 1900, as coordinated artillery and airstrikes start, hitting Fallujah. A light armor task force known as Task Force Wolfpack will begin its assault up the Fallujah Peninsula. Now, their objective was to secure the 2 key bridges, the old bridge and the new bridge, leading into Fallujah, and that was to prevent any enemy reinforcements entering the city and from enemies fleeing the city as well, right? As that hammer swing pushes west, we don't want those guys skirting out of Fallujah and making their way to Ramadi or some other place in Iraq. We want to keep them there and deal with them there. We don't want them going somewhere else and having to drag this fight out longer and longer. They also sought to secure the hospital on the peninsula, and finally to secure the adjacent 506th Iraqi National Guard compound on the river just below one of the bridges as well. They start that around 7 o'clock p.m., 1900 on the 7th. At around 2 o'clock in the morning on the 8th, they have secured the peninsula and all their objectives. So now Fallujah is completely sealed off. There is no in and out anymore.
Yeah, it's on, and the battle begins. So November 8th, that morning, both Regimental Combat Team 1 and 7 are in their final position. They arrive north of the city, and they're going to begin their advance into the city. But just as night falls over the city, they're going to immediately encounter enemy fire. So they're north of the city. They're there. They're visible, and here comes the incoming fire. Now, the Seabees and the Marines of the 4th Civil Affairs Group, they're going to enter the electricity substation, and they're going to cut the Fallujah's electrical power. So lights out.
We own the night, baby.
Own the night. We got this.
How many times did you hear that?
Yeah.
In that first workup training to go to Iraq? How many times did you hear that? We
Every
own the
time.
night, right? Get comfortable with those MVGs, gents.
As much as you hated them. Yeah. But, so by 1900 also, on the 8th there, under the cover of darkness, the 1st Marine Division begins their assault of Fallujah. So in RCT-1 sector, so on the north end, on the western side, they're going to, about a half an hour in, 3-5 is going to launch their assault into that Jolan district that you were speaking of earlier. And following the battalion are 2 main tanks through a cut in the berm west of the train station. So what I have to also explain here is here's the first major problem is on the northern end of the city, there's this massive berm and a train that runs through it on the train tracks. Well, a 3-5 with their armor was able to get through on the far end, but the rest of them are going to get held up pretty bad. And
Right, that berm really becomes a problem for everybody.
So watching on a nearby rooftop, the RCT-1 commanding officer, Colonel Michael Shupp, he observed, quote, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines was making such incredible progress, it was unbelievable. They were just blowing through that push, and it completely unhinged the enemy.
Freaking oorah, dude.
Yeah.
Just getting after it, man.
Those are my boys doing work. Yeah. So Lima Company of 3-1, they arrived to take the train station, and it was secured about an hour later, about 20:30 or 8:30 p.m., an hour after 3-5 launched their assault. Now, engineers are working on 4 different locations trying to breach the railroad tracks and this berm to get other things, tanks, tracks, and other armored vehicles through, and are having a heck of a time. And it's crazy how so much planning, and then here we are with this berm.
Right.
And they're trying to cut a path through, and then on the other side of the berm, it's like a minefield. Obviously, everything's been set up. So they got to clear this minefield, and the tanks of Task Force 27, they could launch their blitz into the northwestern part of Fallujah once they clear and get through this. Unfortunately, though, like I said, the engineers had such a bad time that it's going to be hours before the armor can get through. Some of the armor never even makes it. Now, here's one Lance Corporal Justin Boswood. He's a team leader with 2nd Platoon, Kilo Company 3-1, and he recalled, quote, "We sat in tracks probably 8 to 10 hours, just waiting to roll in with 25 to 30 Marines crammed in each." End quote.
8 to 10. So the only experience I have with tracks is in training. We never employed tracks in combat.
Thankfully.
Thank God. Listen, they're a marvelous machine. If you've got to make an amphibious assault or a movement across the desert, you're in armor. You can move a lot quicker, right? They do make sense.
Yeah, these things are old, though.
But riding in the back of one is one of the worst situations you can find yourself in, man. First off, I can tell you right now, we said 25 to 30 Marines. I bet you they're leaning more towards that 30 Marines side of thing, right? The Marine Corps will cram guys into that. And in the back of these tracks, there's 3 benches. There's one against the left wall, there's one against the right wall, and then there's one that rolls right down the center. This is what you sit on. Now, in this thing, you have on all of your gear, your flak, all your ammo, your Kevlar, which is your helmet. You have your pack underneath your legs, right? And your rifle is sitting on its sling on your chest. Saw gunners, any of that stuff, they got an even bigger thing to deal with. And then if you're a crew serve weapon guy, you're just even more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To make matters worse, when you're sitting on these benches, the guys in the middle are facing you, right? They alternate direction. They alternate the direction they face in the middle. They really squish them dudes on there.
Yeah.
So if I'm sitting on the left-hand side, I'm the first seat in, I'm going to have the guy in the middle. I'm going to have one of his knees between my leg. My right knee will be between his leg. The guy next to me, his left knee will also be between that guy's leg on the middle bench. And then that guy's left leg would be in between the guy next to me on my bench. It'd be between his knees. So, I mean, you are wedged in there so you can't even scratch. You're so tight. Not to mention, there ain't no AC in those things either, right? There's one hole in the top if they have it unbuttoned. If they decide to close it, you're just completely sealed off from the outside. But if they do have it open, there's one hole in the top, and the exhaust pipe from the freaking engine points directly down that hole. So you're just breathing exhaust fumes the whole time. It is unbelievably miserable. And to be stuck in that thing, the longest I've ever been stuck in it was probably 6 hours, and this was at CAX.
Yeah.
We came out of the back of this thing, and we were doing a live fire range, and one of our guys had to come out and shoot a small rocket at a target. Dude, it's so hot. It's 20 degrees hotter in there than it is outside. It's already 100 degrees in the Mojave Desert, so you're thinking 120 degrees inside of this thing, in all your gear, long sleeves, gloves, glass. You're buttoned up head to toe. There's barely any skin exposed at all. We get out of the back of this track. This guy goes to shoot this small rocket. You hear backblast area all secure, rocket, thum, and as soon as he pulls the trigger, he passed out. Immediately, face planted into the sand. I mean, that's what you're dealing with, sitting in these things for a long time. These poor guys are getting ready to go make one of the most dangerous assaults through a city in modern warfare, and they have to sit in the back of an AAV for 8 to 10 hours before they get to do so.
Yeah, awful.
Ugh.
The vibrations are awful. The sound is awful. You come out of that thing, and it's almost like there's life outside. Like, you come out and you see the sky, and you're like,
I can
wow.
breathe.
Yeah, nothing's vibrating. I can see stuff, and it's unbelievable.
You talk about the vibrating. I almost forgot about that, but you're right, dude. The vibrating, it gets like, you ever have something rub your skin enough in one spot that it gets to be like almost painful?
Yeah.
Like, you can start out feeling decent, and then you do it long enough, and it's like water dripping in the same spot over and over and over again. Dude, I forgot about that. That's just another level of miserable.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, these guys, they're stuck in it, and so now this is like now 1:30 in the morning. The remainder of Task Force 27, they begin moving through the breach. So they finally breach this section of the berm, and they assault down Phase Line Henry. So Phase Line Henry, as we had stated before, runs north to south. Everything west of Phase Line Henry is RCT 1. Everything east of Phase Line Henry is RCT 7. So they're coming down. And so these guys, they assault straight down Henry, and they're going to go, tear off into where they're going to go. So, like, in any event, they experience heavy small arms fire, mortars, RPGs, everything you can imagine is being thrown at these guys coming down the line. And Task Force 27, it's their job to clear down this phase line, clear any blockages, clear busted up cars, clear berms, anything, bulldoze it out of the way, blast it out of the way, make a clearing, and also take care of any IEDs that are there.
Anything that might be a possible IED, because again, you only can guess until you go up and confirm, right? Like, that looks suspicious. That might be an IED. But do you remember? I'm like, this episode is making me remember so many things.
Yeah.
Do you remember being the new guy and going to Iraq, and your senior lance corporal being like, "Hey, I think that might be an IED. Go kick it."
Oh, every time, kick it.
Well, you want me to go kick it? Yeah, go kick it.
And you'd be like, why?
We got to find out if it's an IED.
To make sure. Make sure it's not an ID.
Yeah, dude. I hadn't thought about that in so long. Go kick it. I remember
that is
thinking,
something.
what did you just say to me?
Yeah.
Go kick it. Ay. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
that made me that brought me back there
that
for a
is
minute.
important to say. It's like it was true. Now, 3-1, they begin moving into the city from the train station area by 4 in the morning.
Dude, this thing started at 7 p.m. the day or 8 p.m. the day before, and they're not even getting going until 4 a.m. the next day.
Right. You got guys going in 7, 8 o'clock. You got guys going in 1:30, and now 4 o'clock. The Marines and their section of tanks. Now, dude, this is super cool. They come tearing in there with the Richard Wagner's "Ride of the Valkyries" song, blasting as loud as can be.
How cool, dude!
Yeah.
It's like Apocalypse Now.
Right. That's what it makes me think of as well. Just on tanks and trucks, it's pretty neat. So, got to picture that.
Well,
and,
PSYOPs,
imagine that.
dude. Every once in a while, PSYOPs will do some pretty pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
PsyOps is psychological operations, for those that don't know. The quick side story, again, I'm just remembering all this stuff from this episode, but I was SOG in Afghanistan on our FOB, and I get a call over the radio, SOG, this post 1, I need you to get over here. Well, I think something's going on, right? Like, right. I'm hustling, I'm huffing over there. I get up on post, I'm like, what? He's like, listen. And I'm listening, and I hear, I'm on a highway to hell. Well, there's you remember that mosque that was like a quarter mile off the back end of Cop Riley?
Yeah.
From the mosque speakers, some PsyOps guy had got into that mosque and like took over their little CD player and was playing AC/DC's Highway to Hell. He played the whole song. It went quiet for like a minute, and then he started it over again.
Just keep
from
going.
the beginning. Over all day, dude. Highway to Hell kept playing over and over and over again. So you got to tip your hat to them. Sometimes they do some pretty funny stuff, man.
I agree, and it's so random too. Almost, it's like, well, that one's pretty random. Like, how did you even get there and do that? It's like, is this even real life? I'm sitting on post, the Marine sitting on post. Am I really hearing that?
Like, he's probably thinking, am I imagining? Am I losing my mind right now?
Right.
Like, am I really hearing that? I thought the same. When I got up there, I was like, that can't be. That can't be. And I'm like, I'm trying to look for Humvees or something out there, out in that nothingness that was that direction. The only thing out there was that mosque. That's the only thing out there. That's the only thing with speakers.
That's a special story. I like that a lot. So we just covered the RCT 1 on the northwestern side of the phase line. So phase line Henry, again, cutting down the middle. So let's, on the eastern side, let's go over to RCT 7. So back to 1900 at 7 p.m. They're also at the same time launching their invasion into that part of the city. And around 2200, both Bravo and Charlie Company 1-8, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, they're going to begin their attacks dismounted because they can't get through.
A freaking berm, dude.
They're not going to wait till, say, 1:30 or 4 in the morning. So they're told to dismount. And they're going to make their way over and start getting into the city, into this area of the the Al-Hadra Al-Muhammadiyah Mosque area and the Islamic Culture Center. So these are two important pieces that they're got to be working their way towards. And same thing, but they're going in on foot. Now, both of these companies, they're going to encounter heavy sniper fire and very determined insurgents that are waiting for this to happen. And the insurgents are trying to maneuver. These Marines, soldiers, and Navy, they're all going down, and these insurgents are doing everything they can to put a hurting on these guys and maneuver and get on the either side of them, whatever the case. Now, under the cover of a mortar barrage, a group of insurgents rushed towards one of their tanks. Now, the Marines have 1-8. They're going to cut these guys down. So they're like assaulting tanks. So the Marines cut these guys down, and a hail of bullets, and one insurgent, for some reason, didn't take cover. And to quote Bing West's book again, he described what happened next. Quote, "He stood in the street, a bulky vest over his clothes, looking around as though confused. Then he blew himself up, disappearing in a huge black cloud. The Marines ducked as the shockwave hit them. They were lying prone when the red, wet mist floated down and gobs of flesh fell on them like raindrops."
Yuck, bro.
Yuck, bros, right.
But listen, that's just a little foreshadowing of what's to come, right?
Yep.
For people that are unaware, man, this fight is incredibly sad. First off, I've been in a lot of gunfights. I have never seen the Taliban assault. I mean, we didn't even have tanks in Afghanistan. Let's put it that way.
Right.
We don't even have tanks in Afghanistan. I can't imagine seeing an assault against a tank, right? Like them being that aggressive.
Yeah.
And they're just now stepping into the city, and this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this initial push into the city, what they're doing is they're hitting houses. They're, like I said before, they're blitzing. It's going to be very quick and moving. And now they're obviously once they're in, they're hitting the houses, and they're getting
houses
close
they
combat.
need to hit, right? Like if they're taking contact from a house, but they're not room house to house, street to street kind of stuff yet.
No, not yet. No, like stacking up on doors and stuff and hitting every single one of them and sweeping through, not yet. But they're like anything, it's now close combat, and they're in the city, and they're hitting these houses that they need to and just pushing through their objectives as far as they can get.
Crazy. So getting into the next day of this fighting, we're at the 9th now, the 9th of November. I want to make clear that there's two different types of fighters that U.S. coalition forces are running into in this battle. The first of those are the jihadists. For those of you that don't know what I mean when I say a jihadist, those are the guys that have been radicalized by these Islamic terror organizations that have determined that they are going to die in this fight, whether that's a suicide bomber, so an S-vest or an SV bid, they're going to blow themselves up to take out Americans, or they've barricaded themselves into one of these houses or buildings in the city, and they have determined that they're going to fight it out there to the death, right? The other type of fighter that U.S. forces are running into are going to be the main guard fighters. They are going to pursue a little bit more of a militarily sound strategy. They're going to employ a mobile defense, if you will, meaning that when the sun comes up, they're going to use these back alleys and side streets to navigate through the city, get into one of these numerous fighting positions that they have pre-made throughout the city, and ambush U.S. troops. After fighting it out with U.S. troops, they would egress further back into the city, retreat back into the city, rearm, refit, and then basically rinse and repeat, right? So you have they go out, they fight, they come back, they resupply, they go out again and fight, and they'll do this continuously throughout this battle. Well, by 06:30 on the morning of the 9th, 3-5 had driven insurgents pretty well back deep in the Jolan district, and they're moving to make their assault on the Jolan cemetery. Well, as it did that, the rapid push that 3-5 Marines had made has a lot of these insurgents attempting to flee the city across the Euphrates River. Unfortunately for them, part of that task force Wolfpack that took over the peninsula is a Marine small craft company. It's a riverine company, right? They're on the speedboats with the guns. Needless to say, those insurgents don't get across the Euphrates.
Nah, you're secured.
Right?
Get back.
They encounter these devil dogs that are very excited to bring the fight to them. Now, 3-5 will continue to fight through the Jolan district until around 1800 that evening. Right? So starting at 6:30 in the morning until 6 at night. That's 12 hours of fighting. I can't stress enough how exhausting that is, right? Especially after your first day of fighting. It's safe to say that at this point in time, these guys haven't slept in probably 40 hours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably just little cat naps if they can.
And forget having a full meal. They're probably nibbling on snacks from their MREs, right?
Yes.
So they stop at 1800, and they're going to rest for the night. Now, 5 hours after that, Task Force 27's commander is going to send some of his troops to attack the next objective, which would be the Martyrs Cemetery, and that's along Phase Line Fran. This move is going to put Task Force 27 on the main supply route way ahead of schedule. That's Route Michigan, way ahead of schedule. And it's also going to put the rest of the battalions in RCT-1 in a very good position for the next day coming. Now, on the northeastern side of Fallujah, that was RCT-1 on the northwestern side. Over with RCT-7 on the northeastern side, it's important to know that during the night of the 8th, Task Force 22, the Ramrods, moved into a schoolhouse. That's where they took a defensive position up in this schoolhouse in the northeastern section of the city. Well, again, we're going to quote Bing West in his book, No True Glory, because he sums this portion of the fight up very well. But he describes the fighting they encounter the next morning as they begin to make their push further south into the city like this. Quote, "As the sun came up, the schoolhouse came under fire from all directions, from several groups of insurgents, some only a few doors away. Crouching in the street, Army Staff Sergeant Trevor Candelin peered through a 24-power sniper scope he had personally bought and mounted on his M4 carbine." Now, I can attest to this. I'm holding off on the rest of this quote for a minute. Our first deployment to Iraq, we had just left the interceptor vest, which the interceptor vest is the one that these guys are wearing in this fight. It's the one that velcros like that in the front, right? We had just left that model, and we went to what's called the MTV.
Horrible.
Oh my God, it's the worst flak jacket ever created. First off, it's so hot and so cumbersome and covers so much of you, dude. You can't, your body can't breathe at all. I ended up going out and buying my own Spartan vest.
Yep.
I didn't buy the Kevlar fort and all. I just bought the shell, and I took the stuff out of my MTV and put it into it. But I can attest to buying your own gear. You know, the military is great at giving you what you need, but sometimes to really be set up for success, you're going to have to go spend your own money.
Yeah, a little bit here and there.
Now, continuing on with this quote, 300 meters down the street, he saw a man in a black tracksuit with a red bandana around his neck shooting RPGs up at an angle so that they would arc down like mortar shells, enfilading fire with an RPG.
Wow.
Resting his M4 on the hood of the Humvee, Kendallin aimed in and shot his first insurgent.
Good shot.
Excellent. It's a good feeling when you put you put your first guy down, especially if he's lobbing RPGs at your guys.
Certainly.
Now, Kendallin looks over to kind of get a little bit of a good job from another soldier named Cornell, who's next to him. When he looks over to Cornell, though, Cornell was peering through the window of the house next to them, pointing to a stack of Iraqi uniforms and boots. They had stumbled onto a safe house where the insurgents intended to change into the uniforms of National Guard soldiers and infiltrate the American lines.
These guys got everything planned out.
It's
just like we do.
Oh, it's crazy. So Cornell moved up the block with Iraqi Lieutenant Hida and 5 Jundis. That's the advisor's term for the Iraqi soldiers that were serving with them. Cornell is a military advisor to an Iraqi unit, right? One of those Iraqi units that were brought from outside of Al-Anbar province.
Gotcha.
Coming under fire from a yellow house in the middle of the block, the platoon climbed to the roof of the house next door and jumped over a small wall onto the yellow house. Below them, 3 insurgents with rifles ran out of the front door and were shot down. In the center of the gravel roof, there was a small covered entrance to a stairwell. A dozen cement steps led down to a landing. From there, another half-dozen steps set at a right angle led down to the dark, unfinished ground floor. Hearing men yelling in Arabic, Cornell rolled a grenade down the steps. A few seconds after the grenade went off, firing erupted from downstairs and from adjoining roofs. As he scrambled for cover, Cornell tripped and fell backward, his 9mm pistol flying from his hand. The Iraqi soldiers had ducked behind a small wall, the Iraqi soldiers that were with him, and Cornell lay on his side near the entrance to the stairwell, trying to catch his breath and figure out his next move. Suddenly, an insurgent man appeared in the doorway 3 feet away, clutching an AK. Seeing Cornell's pistol in front of him, he snatched it up as Cornell lurched forward. Before the Iraqi soldiers who were with Cornell, the ones that were, part of his unit, before they could do anything, the man shot Cornell in the face, killing him instantly. Lieutenant Hida, who was the Iraqi lieutenant that was alongside Cornell, fired back with his AK, and the man toppled down the stairs. End quote. So that's the kind of fighting these guys are experiencing as they push out of that schoolhouse.
It could just be everywhere, through every threshold, through every corner, through every turn.
Just unbelievable.
And it's just right there. This episode brought to you by Civil War Trails. With over 1,300 sites to explore across 6 states, Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum. Drive the Gettysburg Campaign turn by turn. Paddle past Frederick Douglass's birthplace or hike to remote artillery positions. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. Civil War Trails is not just about the adventure. When you stand in the footsteps of history, these stories become more relevant than ever before. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure today.
Along with Task Force 2-2, you've also got the Marines of 1-3 and 1-8, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, and 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. They're all pushing south in this eastern section of Fallujah. And one of the things that they're starting to experience are these calls for jihad, right? The call for Iraq, or for Iraqi citizens, for Fallujah citizens, and all the fighters there still in Fallujah to take up a jihad. And what I mean by that is, if you've spent any time in the Middle East or Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere that the Islamic faith is the predominant faith, and you see these mosques, they all have speakers on them, and that's for their prayer, right? So they take their religion very seriously in those countries, and it's
Yes.
one of the things. Honestly, it's one of the things I respect about that area of the world. You know, I remember being in Afghanistan and thinking, dude, even the oldest man and the youngest child in this place, 5 times a day, they're pulling their rug out, they're stopping everything they're doing, they're facing towards Mecca, and they're praying
Yep.
every day there is no break from that. Well, during this battle and during numerous other times throughout the Iraqi war, there'll be these pre-recorded messages that'll be played from those speakers, and they're a call for jihad, right? To come take up the fight. Lieutenant Colonel Ramos, who is one of the troops in this section of the battle, he would later recall that, quote, "I'll never forget it as long as I live. The chanting that was going on, it was tribal, it was savage, it was intense, and it was scary. I wanted to destroy that mosque," end quote. One of the battalion's interpreters will translate what this message playing over these mosque speakers is saying, and he says this, quote, "Citizens of Fallujah, stand up. The infidels are here. Kill them all," end quote. So just to give you an idea of the intensity of this kind of fighting, it harkens back to like the Crusades in a religious war almost.
Yeah.
Now, I can only 100%, talk with authority on the wars that you and I participated in. I only fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. I never fought anywhere else, right? I've done a lot of reading. I have a lot of learning. I'm a history enthusiast, right? So I have an idea of the landscape of some of these other wars that we've found ourselves in throughout history. And World War I, for instance. Now, if I were to make a top 5 list of the wars I would least want to be in, World War I would be number 1 on that list. Trench warfare in World War I would have been so hellish and nightmarish. I want no part of that.
Yeah. Agreed.
At the same time, throughout that war and other wars in Europe, you have these moments of humanity that shine through. And we can specifically talk about like Christmas Eve early on in World War I, where both the Germans and the British and the French all come out of their trenches to sing Christmas carols with each other and exchange cigarettes. And like there's this moment of humanity where you can look past the war and see a human being.
Yes.
That doesn't happen in this kind of fighting.
Zero chance of that.
That is the level of hate that both sides have for each other. There's not a chance of anything like that happening. The closest thing I can relate it to would be our fight against the Japanese in World War II in the Pacific. You're not coming across the lines and changing cigarettes with each other. That's not happening.
Yeah, it's over.
There's a certain level of hate that comes along with that kind of fighting it just won't allow for it. And that's the kind of fighting that these guys are finding themselves in Fallujah. Now, Task Force 2-2, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, and 1st Battalion, 8th Marines are going to continue to push southwards. They're going to uncover numerous weapons caches where they're going to find IED making materials, RPGs, ammo stockpiles. You name it, they're encountering it, right? And the fighting is intense. It's really starting to pick up a rhythm now, right? You have the jihadists that are locking themselves into compounds and battling it out to the death. You have the main guard troops that are quick coming in, ambushing and bouncing out and rinsing and repeating that over and over and over again. But eventually, RCT-7, Task Force 2-2, and the rest of RCT-7 will gain a foothold in the industrial district of Fallujah, which is now we're kind of getting into the southeastern side of the city. They're going to bed down there for the night. They're going to get resupplies, conduct their medevacs and all that stuff. They've also now secured the rest of Route Michigan. So getting medevacs in and out of the city is going to be a little easier than it had been before this.
Right.
Now, Spectre gunship, again, the hand of God airplane, right? That if you play Call of Duty, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's going to, throughout the night, be taking out groups of insurgents left and right.
Just zapping targets.
Yes.
Now,
there's some, boom. There's some more, boom. I mean, it's I make it sound trivial and very easy, but that's really kind of what it's like for this thing, this eye in the sky that is just 9,000 feet in the air and raining death and destruction. Because of that, most of the Marines and soldiers are going to finally get a chance to really kind of catch up on some rest and recuperate for the next day, which they are going to need it for the next day. The 10th, at least for 3-5 in particular, is going to be the most costly of the days they encounter.
Yeah. So because the reason being is because 3-5 up to this point is really the only battalion that's methodically doing this house to house, street to street fighting.
Yeah, right.
Everybody else is still.
They haven't done that yet. Yeah, there's still that lightning war, right?
Yeah, the lightning war. And 3-5's battalion commander referred to this as the squeegee effect. And what he meant by that was, quote, the other battalions had pushed quickly through, in effect, rubbing the dirtiest spots off the window. It was up to 3-5 to apply a thorough wiping, end quote. So I can remember the commandant coming into Marja Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, I forget, 2010, and he had something similar, that we were snow plowing the Taliban out of the area and restoring order. There were women and children coming back and all that stuff. So I understand that thought process. So at the time with 3-5 now, each line platoon is going to be assigned 2 blocks, like a 2-block sector of the city, and they're going to have to clear those rooms and buildings. Now, a line platoon is your infantry platoon, your riflemen, machine gun, mortars, assaultmen.
All those guys, the machine gunners, assaultmen, mortarmen, they've been tasked out from the weapons platoon.
Yeah.
So ideally in a battalion, you get 4 platoons, 3 line platoons, 1 weapons platoon.
Yep.
Right? And at this point, everybody's been tasked out. So they've got their 3 line platoons with attachments, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So like line platoon plus, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
This is how they're going. And so they're going to cover their sector of the city, and they're going to methodically clear these rooms and clear these houses, house to house and room to room, every single one of them. Now, normally, or what should have happened, but of course things don't always happen the way they should.
Right.
These guys that go in, say you go in, you make contact with the enemy, you're supposed to come back out and hit it with something else, whether it be a tank, a rocket, a bulldozer, just smash through this thing, explode this thing, air, mortars, anything, kill everybody inside, like decapitate everything, and then make your way back in there, drag the bodies out, and clear everything in that space.
Dude, that makes me think, first off, savage.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I noticed in researching this, is how much bodies are being dragged out into the street from these houses.
Yeah.
And I get the reasons why. But one thing that I came across in the research for this, you got the First Battle of Fallujah. Now we're in the Second Battle. Both times the city was basically put under siege. And there's so many dead bodies and there's so much chaos going on that there are stories of cats running around with human eyeballs in their mouth, or dogs running off with a human arm or a human leg, like wild animal, like domesticated animals that are now roaming the city wild, just feasting on these dead bodies around the city. I mean, the sights this city had during this time period had to be horrendous.
Yeah, that's like you don't see that anywhere else, except for in combat scenarios like this. So that's incredible. But to clear these rooms, like I can remember in training, you throw a chem light in there,
right, or paint the wall. Yeah,
paint it with something, or something to mark. But there's no time for that. They got to mark it with the bodies they drag out of it. So now this type of fighting, this is all very deadly, and engagements happening at the same time, and the Marines at 3-5, they're not always going to have that support as the plan would allow for. So here's an example.
Well, before you get into the example, I guess it's important for the people to know that there's little pockets of these deadly firefights happening simultaneously all across the Jolan district, where they're doing this house to house. So you might get the tank to help with one of those, but the other 30 that are happening,
right,
they're kind of on their own, right?
You have a sister squad in another building near you, but not near enough,
right?
And you can hear what's going on. So a rifle squad from Kilo Company 3-5, they're going to encounter a fire team-sized element of insurgents, all barricaded in this one house with an RPK. Now, fire team, 4 or 5 guys. And they're going to be up in there. And Sergeant Jeffrey Kirk, he's the squad leader, opening the front gate to this compound. So you have your building, but you have everything seems to have a compound, these big metal swinging gates. So
Right.
makes entry into this courtyard area outside of this house, and as he takes a few steps in, Al-Qaeda, these guys throw a grenade at him.
Yikes.
So he backs out. Quickly, these guys, Marines, they jump back out. Now, reorganize, refit. We know what's going on now. This is a hot one. So Sergeant Kirk goes in there with a couple other Marines. He throws a grenade in there as he makes entry. Well, they throw a grenade at him at the same time.
Swapping grenades.
Luckily, the second grenade that was incoming, it was a dud. Now, like we were saying the other day, this guy obviously is going to scream grenade, because in the Marine Corps, grenades incoming, frag out is friendly, grenades outgoing.
Right.
So this has got the communication that these guys got to have in a split second environment of constant evolving
You're right,
situations is really insanity.
It's
But,
like not saying repeat on the radio.
Yeah. Right. Say again.
Dude, you know how long I said say again?
Yeah.
I still say it to this day. Instead of asking someone to repeat what they just said, I'll be like, say that again?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Certain things will always stick. Now, so these guys are going to make an attempt into this same compound and building multiple times. And moving left of the machine gun fire from the building, like I said, Kirk throws a second grenade and then attempts to make entry into the building, but the machine gun fire is again so heavy now, they're forced back out.
Some of those jihadist fighters that are just barricaded up in there.
Oh yeah. They have to probably do it 10 times or 20 times or 30 times until it's just like drop a bomb on this.
Yeah.
But the Marines, everybody, the troops there, they're going to do whatever it takes, which is so incredible. So Sergeant Kirk, he attacks the room again with grenades and small arms fire. He finally breaches the doorway, and when he does that, he's shot in the butt. So now he's injured despite his wounds. Sergeant Kirk, he manages to kill the insurgent machine gunner. So he takes that machine gun nest out of the picture. Other insurgents in the building, they emerge and they begin to engage a squad of Marines. Same thing, grenades, small arm fire, and once again force the squad back out into the streets, out of the building, out of the courtyard, back into the street.
Urban combat, clearing a house is already scary enough as it is. Having to do that same building like over and over and over again, that's freaking crazy scary, dude.
Yeah.
Because they know you're there. You know what's in there now, and you got to go face it again.
You already know, yeah.
Ugh.
You just got pushed out. Now you got to push your way back in. It's like bravery. That's home of the free because of the brave. Those guys on the ground, they're doing it on somebody else's doorstep. They're not doing it in our homes, in our cities, and
right.
in our nation. So
you guys never seen that. They've never seen that house before. They've never been on that street before.
No. And so what they're doing is incredible. So, like I said before, all the wounded, Sergeant Kirk, he's going to refuse medical attention, and he's going to make a total of 10 assaults on the building. So by that afternoon, 3-5, they get this intel and this map. It says, you got to go check out this area called the Palm Grove. And what they have there is people, these guys, some of them that were involved in the killing of these 4 American contractors, they have real estate there. So the Marines are going over. They're receiving contact, sniper fire. Once that kind of subsides, they're going to push through the objective, get inside into this warehouse area. Now, before he gets into that area, his name's Corporal Michael Hibbert. He's leading a squad of Marines through there, and he finds 3 artillery shells lying on the ground in this like riverbank area.
Big IED.
Big 155s. And so they get these engineers, they come over, they cut the wires. Hibbert then blows a hole in the side of this building, and his squad comes into this large like bay area, and they find all sorts of RPGs and these large 122 millimeter rockets. So they're finding a bunch of crap in here. Now, on the smaller side of the room, they see a safe against the wall, and they hear a noise, something. And the Marines, they drag that safe aside, and they find a hidden passageway. It's like a crawl space in a way, if you will. And inside, there was this Iraqi was chained hand and foot, and he was the taxi driver for the 2 French journalists that were captured back in August. Now, the enemy fighters, they had let these 2 French journalists go. They let them go,
Return
back
them
to
to
France,
yeah.
whatever the case is. But the taxi driver, they chained him up in there, and he starved to death. And they find this like torture chamber,
Yikes, man.
in this place. Now, back from a quote from Bing West, I'm going to quote this for the rest of this story here. Quote, Hibbert continued his search. The third door he kicked in led to a film studio with the green and black flag of Zarqawi's terrorist gang, Al-Ansar. On the wall, the black blood on the floor where Nicholas Berg had been decapitated in May. On a table was a glass of water with ice in it.
They're still there? They just left. They were just there.
Yeah. In the next room were 2 computers, a number of lights, a CD burner, 2 video cameras, VHS tapes, a television, a VCR, and a recording schedule typed in English. The schedule included what time a prisoner was to be brought out and washed up, when his confession had to be taped, when the execution should be done, how long it would take to digitize the video and make copies, and when to leave Fallujah in order to deliver the tape to the Al Jazeera studio in Baghdad to be shown on primetime TV. End quote.
Jeez, man.
They're discovering.
First off, could you imagine even being in that room? Right? Like the room where Nick Berg had been decapitated.
Yeah.
And then to see that schedule in English down to that minute of a detail,
Yep.
how to handle that process.
I'm sure they saw it on TV too if they were stateside at the time. And, and then now these guys are in there.
So Zarqawi, just a different level of evil, man.
Yep.
Different level of evil.
But the Americans are going to bring it down or address it.
Well, as crazy as all that is, I'm going to take us over to the eastern side of the city with RCT-7. And specifically, I'm going to tell a story, one of the crazier stories from the Second Battle of Fallujah, and that is Staff Sergeant David Bellavia's story.
All right.
He's a squad leader in Task Force 2-2, so he's in an Army unit. And it's later in the evening, so they've been fighting all day. His squad has been tasked with clearing out a string of houses where they believe a group of 6 to 8 insurgents have taken shelter for the evening. Now, they clear the first 9 houses, no problem. They start going into this next one, and as they're moving through this house, they go through one room, come into another, and as they're getting ready to make their way out into like this central room, this main room, there's a staircase, and underneath that staircase have been placed Jersey barriers, like the Jersey barriers you would see on the highway, where 2 insurgents have set up a machine gun bunker. Well, as they come into the sight picture of this, this bunker that these insurgents have set up, the insurgents open fire at like point blank range. You're talking a matter of 3 feet from, the front person in this squad.
Yeah.
At that point, in a separate room in this same compound, shooting through a window to the outside of the building, another group of insurgents opens up. So now you have machine gun fire in their front, and then also covering the exit to the building, right?
Okay.
Bellavia knows something has to be done. His men are trapped, and it's getting ready to get really bad. So Bellavia initially rolls over. Everybody's on the right-hand side of this hallway that they're in, on their bellies, because there's rounds bouncing around everywhere.
Insane.
Bellavia rolls over to his left and attempts to pull the trigger on his M16, and he can't. The enemy round has shot his gun, and it's malfunctioning. He can't shoot it.
Whoa.
So he asks for one of his guys to give him the SAW, the squad automatic weapon. It's a belt-fed 5.56 machine gun, and The guy hands it over. Bellavia, I've seen him talk about this. You know, normally you're taught to pull a trigger with the tip of your finger, right? It's more, you don't pull it. It's more of a push, right? You push the trigger, right? Controlled shots, and ideally with a machine gun, 3-second bursts. I would tell you what they told us to say, but I do want to keep this, as PG as possible. But die MF or die. But the amount of time it takes you to say that's how long a burst should take, right? Or die Fuzzy Bunny dies is another one I've heard of.
Die Fun Fuzzy die. Okay.
But that being said, Bellavia, he wraps his whole finger around the trigger because he knows he's getting ready to dump this drum of 5.56 into this room. He's trying to make it so his guys can get out.
Yeah.
Well, he starts ripping off rounds, right? He just squeezes and they start going to town. And he moves into the room with the staircase and actually gets up on top of the staircase. And he says he's like trying to shoot it, like almost like a leaf blower. He's trying to shoot it down into this bunker where the insurgents have hidden themselves. Well, he ends up getting a runaway gun. And for those that don't know what a runaway gun is, with an open bolt weapon, a belt-fed machine gun weapon, it can malfunction sometimes to where even when you let go of the trigger, it's still just shooting. And the way to stop that is to twist the links, right? You twist them and break them off, or twist them so they can't feed into the, into the cycle of the machine gun. But he thinks, what the heck, man? This is what I want to have happen anyways, right? So he's just dumping rounds. Well, he eventually runs out of ammo, and then he hears the two insurgents whispering to each other.
Oh, no.
So he's just dumped 200 rounds of ammo into this bunker and hasn't hit any of them. And now he's in the room with them on the other side. Like, they're underneath the staircase he's standing on top of.
Okay.
The rest of his squad has left the building, so he has to make like this just insane dash back out of that room, down the hallway, and out of the house. And he's like, he says he can feel the heat of the rounds chasing him, right? He's like sprinting out of there, and they're shooting everywhere.
Yes.
Well, he gets outside. They call up a Bradley, and the Bradley shoots numerous rounds from its 25 millimeter cannon into this house, right? And for a multitude of reasons, Bellavia decides he wants to go back in. Now, they've called for a bomb, but like we had mentioned earlier, they're like waiting. They're like 15th in line, right? So it's going to be a minute.
No time for that.
So Bellavia recruits one other guy to go in with him and a reporter that is following them. And this reporter actually films all of this. It's crazy. It's in a documentary called Only the Dead. Highly recommend watching it. It is crazy. But Bellavia and this other soldier enter the house again. Now, this time, Bellavia's got an M16 again. He's not toting a saw anymore. And the other soldier has a 9mm pistol, the Beretta. He's toting a Beretta.
Okay.
And they get into this compound, and they get back up to where they had engaged, that machine gun position. And some shots are exchanged, so Bellavia ducks back into this hallway that they approached from. Well, he peeks around the corner and sees one of the insurgents loading an RPG, right? And he knows, like, dude, I got to do something. Let me just interject here. There's a few things that I didn't mention. I've seen an interview with him where he's talking about this, this experience, and he says when he walks back in, the plumbing system in this building, right? When that Bradley shot its cannon into this building, it hit the plumbing system somehow. So he said first off, it smelled terrible, but there's water everywhere. Well, that water is showing him approaching because it's sending ripples. They can hear him stepping in the water, and it's sending ripples out away from where he's stepping.
Jeez, man.
Right? Like, that's the kind of stuff that like an army write-up would never get. You know what I mean? You have to hear that from the first-hand source.
Right.
He says he's looking down and seeing that, and then he also starts noticing that there's, like, their version of C4 everywhere, just plastered on the ground. He said there's, like, blasting caps dangling just randomly all over the place. He said whoever did it, they didn't really know what they were doing, obviously, but there's explosives all throughout this house. Then he peeks in and sees this guy loading an RPG, and he thinks, okay, well, sympathetic detonation, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if this thing goes off, this whole house is going up, and my guys are still right outside the building. So he knows he has to do something. He runs into the room where this machine gun bunker had been, and he kills the guy with the RPG. He turns to shoot at the other guy, right, and they exchange gunfire back and forth. He ends up hitting this guy, but that guy runs away from him back into what they called the kitchen, right? And there's another room back there where the guys outside were taking machine gun fire from when all this started through that window. That insurgent dips into there. Well, they're standing out there, and the guy that's with Bellavia signals that he is almost out of ammo. So Bellavia tells him, go back and get an M16 and a shotgun and then come back in here, right?
All right.
That guy goes skirting off, and Bellavia looks behind him and realizes there's a room behind him that he hasn't cleared yet, which that sends shivers down my spine just to think about that. I'm in this house by myself, and I'm right in front of a doorway that I haven't been in this room. No one's been in this room yet. So he does what any sane grunt would do, and he goes in and clears this room. He gets in there. It's dark. He says that he's in the Army, so Marines at this point are using the 7 Bravos for the most part. That's the one that covers both eyes. The 7 Bravos are a night vision device.
Right.
It's the one that covers both eyes and comes down to a single out source, right? So it's like looking through a pinhole at everything. You have no peripheral vision. Well, he being in the Army, he even talks about this. They get the new gear first, usually. I mean, before the Marine Corps does. He's got PVS-14s. PVS-14s cover one eyeball. So you have one eye that's not night vision and the one that is. That's what you and I used when we were in.
You got to keep one eye closed.
Takes you a little while to get used to, but you do get used to it. And honestly, they're very effective night vision devices. But he was saying, for whatever reason, something happened. His night vision the entire time is going on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off, which is the last thing you want to have happen, right?
Yeah.
He says that. He goes into this room. He clears it. His night vision is still malfunctioning, but he determines that there's no one in this room with him. And he said there's a bed, and there's a dresser, and a wardrobe. There's just crap everywhere. It's the master bedroom. He said around that point, someone comes down the stairs, and the insurgent that had been in the kitchen bum rushes the door to the room that he's in. He ends up taking out that insurgent. And then as this other insurgent comes down the stairs, there's like a crack between the door jamb and the wall, and his NVGs just happened to be on for a little bit of time, and he could see him, and he shot him through the crack in that door, right?
Whoa.
But he starts realizing because these guys are returning fire as he's engaging them. He starts realizing that there's tracers cutting across the room, like in a direction that he's not shooting, and he realizes that there's an insurgent inside this wardrobe, this big wardrobe in the room with him. How freaking crazy, man.
From everywhere,
He said
man.
as soon as he realizes that, both the doors on this wardrobe bust open and this insurgent comes sprinting out, and he's shooting, and he's got his AK-47 like tucked under his arm, shooting backwards towards the wardrobe.
What?
It's kind of where Bellavia is at this point. He's like over next to the wardrobe. Well, Bellavia says, luckily, the wardrobe fell and landed on its doors, and it blocked a lot of those rounds that this insurgent was shooting at him. So he was able to engage that insurgent, and he shot him 3 times in the back. And he said that guy screams out in fear and pain, and ends up going through the door and then up the staircase, which is right outside this door. Well, Bellavia pursues. He follows the blood trail upstairs, and he said, again, his feet are wet. Now, it's not wet upstairs. All the wetness is downstairs, but his feet have been standing in this, so his shoes are wet, right? He gets to the top of the staircase, and just so happens that both feet slip at the same time. So as soon as both feet slip and he lands on the ground, an AK-47 round impacts the wall right where his head was.
What are the chances?
I mean, dude, you have things like that happen all the time in combat, it seems like. But this to have it happen in this case, in this story, and in this scenario, it's just like one thing after another with him. Well, what had happened is that the insurgent that had been in that wardrobe in the master bedroom had ran up the stairs and went into an adjacent room and was sitting there waiting for him.
Crazy.
Well, now that Bellavia has had that round impact the wall, sees where the insurgent is, he pulls the pin on a grenade and throws it into that room. It explodes, and it definitely wounds the insurgent. He says he can hear him cry out, but the guy's still alive. So Bellavia gets up, goes in. It's smoky. right? He just
course.
set off a grenade in there. He can't see nothing, dust and smoke everywhere, and he realizes the room is full of propane tanks, right? So he can't just be shooting willy-nilly in there. And he's like waving his M16 around the room, trying to find this insurgent, and ends up getting into a tussle with this guy. And he loses his M16, gets kicked somewhere, and the two guys are wrestling. And he said that the insurgent was missing a chunk of forearm. So every time the insurgent would try to like battle him, beat him back, he would just stick his hand in that part of his forearm and squeeze. Yeah. And then it was so painful for that insurgent, he would kind of let go and reset a little bit. Well, he thinks that this guy's about done. I mean, the guy's been shot 3 times, been hit by shrapnel from a grenade.
Yep.
You think he's about done, and then all of a sudden he calls out to someone upstairs, and someone above him on the roof above him answers in Arabic, and so now he's like, I got to do something, right? And then as soon as he's realizing all that, there's a gunshot, boom, right next to his head. The insurgent he was wrestling with had a handgun and couldn't manage to get it like aimed at him, but shot it right past his head. So now Bellavia is like, he's taking his helmet off, he's beating him with his helmet, he's opening his flak jacket and beating him with the sappy plate portion of that interceptor vest. When you open it up, the sappy plate's on one side, and he's beating him with that, still not completely subduing him.
What the heck?
He ends up taking his Gerber, his multi-tool out of his pocket, and having to stab the guy in the neck. He said the first time he went to go stab him, he hit the guy's collarbone, and his hand slid down the knife and cut his pinky. So then he used one hand to find where to stab, and he said as soon as he stabbed it, he could feel like the spurt.
Yep.
And to speed things along, he started giving the guy like CPR chest compressions to make him bleed out quicker.
Dude.
Right?
Savage.
Because he's saying like I'm exhausted at this point. He's like, I've got nothing left. You know what I mean? Like, and I have to deal with one other guy still, right? So he's doing anything he can to take care of this guy he's fighting in this room. And well, eventually that guy is dead. Bellavia gets up, and he has that guy's AK-47 now, and because he can't find his rifle, and he walks out of the room onto the roof of the second floor. And there's like an overhang over him. And he thought, I'm just going to smoke a cigarette, one, to help me see because I can't see anything. He doesn't have his NVGs on anymore because he took his helmet off to beat that guy with it.
Right.
So he wants a cigarette, right? And he wants to be able to see. So he thinks he can use the cherry of that cigarette to kind of help him see a little bit, you know?
Jeez.
As soon as he goes to light this cigarette, somebody jumps off the 3rd-story roof and lands in front of him. And he said they landed really hard and they ended up breaking their legs, like a bad break, right?
Good.
The enemy's weapon went flying with the magazine came out of it. And Bellavia said, he has this dead insurgent's AK-47, and he went to go shoot the guy, the guy that just jumped off the 3rd story. Didn't hit him at all. It wasn't accurate. The weapon was shooting everywhere. It was on full auto.
What the heck?
So real quick, he turns around, runs back into the room he just had that hand-to-hand fight with the dead guy in, and finds his M16. He picks it up and shoots the guy that's now running across the roof to jump off the roof. He shoots him like 3 or 4 times. The guy falls off the roof, lands on the ground, and Bellavia said he could hear the saw gunners downstairs engage him.
Just finish him up. Imagine that.
That's just crazy. So single-handedly, he went in and cleared a house of 6 insurgents.
So he's still up there all by himself.
Right, but he gets word now. His guys he's linked back up with his guys, and now that bomb that he had called for before this whole thing started, they have to move. They have to move out of that building now because that bomb is on its way in.
Oh,
right?
dude! What?
After the fact, right? It's just crazy. So eventually,
geez.
After the battle, he's awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, which is eventually upgraded to the Medal of Honor. And
Very good.
He's awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on November 10th, which
good for him.
He should have been. That's crazy. 6 guys.
And it's
by
crazy
yourself.
that some of this was caught on camera or recorded in some case.
Seriously, and the way you see it in the documentary, it adds a very, very healthy level of fear to it, because from the reporter's perspective, the reporter doesn't have night vision goggles on. So they get into that, Bellavia goes into that first room, and the reporter loses him, and he just has to stay. And all of a sudden, the building goes quiet, and it's quiet for a long time. I mean, that's like, it doesn't get much scarier than that.
Right. You're
You
just
know?
a reporter just sitting there filming, just trapped like a rat almost. Like
Yeah.
you can't move.
Now, one thing I do have to mention, November 10th was Staff Sergeant Bellavia's 29th birthday. He did that on his 29th birthday.
Wow.
It wasn't only his birthday, though. As you know, it was also the Marine Corps' birthday that day.
Yes, sir.
And Marines being Marines, the sergeant major for 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines decides that they're going to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday.
Right in the middle of the battle, eh?
Yep. This is Sergeant Major Michael Berg. And he has PSYOP Humvees playing the Marine Corps hymn and all that stuff. And
Cool.
he's cutting up a piece of his pound cake from his MRE to give to the youngest Marine there. That's the tradition, right? The oldest, most senior Marine cuts a piece of the cake and serves it to the youngest Marine present, and that's how the ball begins, right? Well, they don't have any cake. They got a pound cake from an MRE. They're going to make do. And as he's doing this, some insurgents start shooting some RPGs and machine gun fire outside of this compound that they're in.
Yeah.
And Sergeant Major Berg is quoted as doing this. He says he stops in the middle of this ceremony, looks up at his Marines and goes, excuse my language, but this is what he says. He says, "Shut those bastards up." And over 200 rifles and machine guns begin to engage the insurgents out in the streets of Fallujah for several seconds before Sergeant Major Berg is quoted as saying, "Ceasefire, ceasefire." As they finished, as they followed their orders and ceased fire, the battlefield was once again quiet. Sergeant Major Berg said, "That's more like it. Continue with the ceremony."
That's incredible. That's
Right?
super cool.
I mean, that's pretty gangster, dude.
Yeah.
That's pretty gangster.
Love that guy.
And also, the Marine Corps likes to keep up with their traditions, man. Even in the middle of the worst city fighting since Vietnam,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so, with all that, the on November 10th, so the 1st Marine Division assault and had secured their objectives and ran across central Fallujah. General Natonsky, he wanted to press the attack and start an east to west assault through the rest of Fallujah. However, there were still pockets of resistance. Like, there will always be pockets of resistance. There were still things there. So concerned about this, RCT 7's commanding officer requested a delay in crossing central Fallujah so that his 3 battalions could take a rest. Like the amount of heavy fighting in these 3 days.
they've been getting worked. And
These guys are.
they don't have anybody like 3-5 on the eastern side that's been going through methodically clearing these houses, right? Like, they've just been pushing through, and there's still insurgents behind them.
Right, exactly. So, but with the concern, so you have multiple commanders thinking about this situation, and the concern with pausing for just the slightest moment and breaking the momentum is that things are just going to get worse or fall back into what they just were, lose what you fought for.
Right, because, again, the central idea is speed through this city, right? We want a lightning bolt through this city and then worry about clearing.
Right. So the new plan, one battalion from each regiment is going to be held back to continue the clearing phase north of phase line Fran. So the rest of them are going to push down further and continue to do their sweeping. One battalion from each is going to
Stay back and
stay
house
back
to
and
house, street to
house.
street.
Yeah, imagine how you get selected for that. Now, 3-5 would continue to clear the northwest sector of Fallujah, while 1-3 would finish clearing the northeast. The remaining battalions would continue to push southwest through the city, like I said. And all these guys, of course, by now, most of them are doing this not unscathed. Most of them that are still able to, or that have not been medevaced or casevaced, will do this with injuries that either they refuse to have treated, or they're able to have treated right there in the field with medics and corpsmen, and continue to bring the fight to the enemy regardless.
Yeah. What are our casualties at right now in this part of the battle?
So we're talking November 8, 9, 10. There's 3 days and nights of overall fighting. The cost to the American lives is going to be 19 killed in
19
action.
killed already in 3 days.
That's going to consist of 1 sailor, 2 soldiers, and 16 Marines. So, and that doesn't even account for the hundreds wounded that you don't even know about. Like I said, some have been taken out of the fight. Some remain to continue on.
And a lot of those guys that are taken out of the fight are getting patched up and then coming right back out.
Yeah,
to the field,
and they don't want to miss it. Don't want to miss a beat.
No.
Like, that's just the amount of you would think you get knocked out like that and you want to stay out, but everybody's so, it's an urgent thing to get back in the fight as soon as you can. And of course, we know Marines just like that, that have done that, been out of the fight for a couple weeks, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, come back, ready to go again. Like nothing ever happened.
Well, what a crazy story. We're only halfway through, by the way. This is just part one of a 2-part series on the Battle of Fallujah. So be ready for the next evolution of this battle, and in a few weeks we will bring it to everybody out there to be able to watch and listen and enjoy and learn and appreciate the sacrifices made by these Marines and soldiers in the city of Fallujah.
Yep, everybody involved. So soak it up, because that's just 3 days. It's incredible.
Nuts. Well, all right, man. It was a good time.
Yeah, definitely.
Till next time, as always, stay frosty.